Hello and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about everything knee rehabilitation based. So obviously with knees, it's very common with sports and with running that the knees can take a bit of a battering. So I'm going to go through is give you two of the best exercises that I use with people in the gym as part of the rehabilitation process. Obviously I've got to say, when you're getting any information online, bear in mind that this is not specific to you, which is why I'm going to give you so much reasoning behind the exercises so you can figure out whether or not it's applicable. If you stay to the end, I'm going to actually go through two of the exercises that I'd actually avoid, which are commonly prescribed. The last one being the one that I find creates the most knee irritation, despite it being one of the most commonly prescribed knee rehab exercises. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is what I would call a foot coil. And what I mean by foot coil is the ability to keep your foot in line, so facing forward, as you coil your hip in one direction like this, and then in another direction like this. And this is really important because if you have a noticeable restriction where you go like that and then suddenly feel something like your IT band or restriction through the hip or through the lower back, this is an indication of what's going on from a myofascial point of view. And what that basically means is how well the connective tissue can lengthen when you're doing something like walking or running or climbing up a hill. So the principle behind this one, and the reason why I'm supported, is because what I want to be able to do is balance and keep my hip bone over my foot. I want to be able to create a tripod, so big toe down, little toe down and heel. And think of it as like you're trying to float your body weight through the mid part of the foot. So I'm aiming to make my center of mass go over this part of the foot, like so. Then what you're going to do is keep a slight bend in the knee, like this, and you're just going to twist and rotate, trying to keep everything in line and then find that biting point. What I mean by biting point is where you feel as though you can't go any further. You're going to hold that position and just stay there and breathe, and then just gently twist into it. So twisting like so. Just looking to stretch the tissue and coax it into moving a little bit more. So I'm just rotating into it. I can feel a stretch in my hip here, and I'm just gently rocking until that starts to open up. If you do this for 5 breaths, 30 seconds, however long you want, what you'll notice is it just starts to open up that little bit more and stretches the hip. The most important thing to realize about this is it's an active exercise. And what I mean by that is that you constantly gripping the floor with your foot. If you can't do that, it's an indication that your foot is weak, and that's where we want to start putting the most amount of emphasis. Once we've done this, you're then going to go into the open. And what you want you to do is open and go the opposite way. You're going to put your opposing foot down now. So now this foot's on the floor, and you're just going to turn and twist like so. Now what you want to be doing here is that you don't want the knee to cave in, so you don't want a collapse. You want to keep the knee facing forward, and you're just going to contract here whilst you open up the front of the hip. And this region here in the front of the hip is very, very important for allowing our foot to be able to pronate, which is an extremely important part of knee mechanics. So just opening up like this, knee goes out, open, stretch the hip. So the combination would be foot nice and strong, weight in the middle, rotate, twist in, get that stretch there, making sure the knee isn't excessively going out and we're not going too much onto the border of the foot. The foot always wants to have those 3 points of contact. And then you're going to rotate and do this. Now, if you're somebody who has things like medial meniscus issues, or you have problems with the rotation in the foot because of restrictions, this may seem like a bit of a contradiction. But if you think about it, if that knee is restricted in these movements, so you can't go any further than this and this, the tighter that gets, the more likely you are to encounter problems with the knee long term. Because if you don't have that range of motion due to the pain or due to the restrictions, this is going to get worse over time. So what you want to do if you do find you have any pain doing this exercise is just work within your range that you've got. So don't go too aggressive. Hold that position and just give your body the ability to stay there. And over time, as you do it, it'll improve, it'll get better. But the biggest thing is that if you never expose your body to the position and never expose the knee to that position, the muscles will get tighter and tighter, weaker and weaker, And again, it leads to more problems in the future. The next exercise is something I call a floating foot step through. And what this is where you're learning actually how to control the toes and knee position. So think of it as the first exercise that helps you strengthen the foot in one position as the hip moves. Now we're going to strengthen the foot as the hip moves over it, which is a really important part of our walking mechanics. So again, I'd always recommend staying stable, so against the wall, or if you're doing it in the gym, against the power rack. The reason being is that what you're going to be doing is moving essentially like this. So you're going to have your foot forwards, a slight bend in your knee, so you don't want to lock the knee out. You're going to get the pressure onto the side of the toes. So think of it as your fifth, fourth, and third toe is where the pressure is going to be. Now, if this automatically feels weak or unstable, or you can't connect with it, that's a key indication you're not using that area, which is, again, one of the reasons why your knees might be painful to start with. So I'm going to have a slight bend in my knee, pressure out to the side. I'm going to have my heel just slightly raised. So just a small heel raise. Imagine that you've got a drawing pin underneath your heel and you don't want to put your foot down. Then what I'm going to do is, as I load, I'm going to step forward and transfer the weight onto my big toe as I bring my opposing foot forward. So think of it as a rolling motion where you're controlling going from outside to inside onto that big toe. So it's stepping back like this, stepping through onto the big toe, allow the knee to come in. So what we're doing here is we're ingraining that knee in pronation that we really need. Now, what this isn't is a calf raise. So you don't want to be up onto your toes like this and folding through. That is that's the wrong thing to do, because we're going to be shortening the calf muscles, which isn't the goal. We actually want to do the opposite and teach them how to lengthen. So we're keeping, again, that heel just slightly raised, step through, roll the foot in, let the heel come forward and back. Now, this is actually a really challenging exercise, especially if you do have weakness in the feet, which is why I'd only start with anywhere between 5 to 10 reps maximum before changing it. Because again, we're looking for the quality of the reps, not the duration. So remember, the key points being soft knee, weight on the outside, transfer the hip forward, so take a step through, and then the pressure as your heel's about to strike, the pressure should be all through the big toe. Okay, so one of the most common exercises I'll see given for knee rehab is a pistol squat or a pistol squat to bench. And this is where someone would obviously go onto one leg, they would sit down like this, and then they'd bring themselves back up into that position. Very often given as a way of strengthening the knee. Now, in theory, it is a good exercise, because what you're doing is teaching the body how to contract, or teaching that knee how to contract from a very flexed position. But the reality is, even for trained individuals, it's far too advanced, and it's not addressing the primary problem when it comes to knees, which is if a foot, or this bone here, so your tibia, is overly pronated, so the knee is traveling in and your arch is flatter, what's happening when you do this movement is, as you're going down into the eccentric part, that knee will be caving in hard. So if you're weak in this position, or weak in this glute specifically, you've got your body weight traveling through this part of the knee, which can lead to that medial irritation. What you'll also get is an increase in tightness in the outside here. So lots of pressure here, increase in tightness there. In other cases where people could have a high arch and rotated outwards like this, so in other words, the knee is excessively onto the outside of the foot, this can then create tension in the IT band, and here in a shortened position, it can irritate the lateral part of the knee and the lateral meniscus. But the tighter these parts here get, the more it's going to shut off your ability to pronate. So in other words, you're not going to be able to flatten the foot, which then causes an issue further up the chain. So with this exercise, the reason why I wouldn't start here is because we haven't learned how to control that knee rotation, pronation and supination. And what you'll find is, especially in situations where you don't have a band or you can't resist, is that people will lower themselves down and then fall to the ground like that. And soon as you hit that falling motion, you've not got control, you're not properly learning how to control the muscles, so there's little really reward in doing that movement and doing that exercise. It doesn't mean you'd never do it, but you need the prerequisites first, and you'd need to build the active range of motion, or at least you're able to get down to about here and get yourself out of that. But remember, if you don't train gait first, so in other words, the movement that we do the most often, which is generally here, if you don't train that to begin with, there's no real point in trying to get someone out of positions where they're all the way down here. Right, so if you made it this far, here is the number one exercise that I would recommend avoiding initially at the start. And that's really important because, like I want to be a proponent of, there are no good and bad exercises, just more and less applicable. But what I see is this exercise done far too early and with far too much intensity, and that's where it actually prolongs knee rehabilitation because you're just almost re-injuring the knee and creating inflammation. So the exercise, if you haven't already guessed it, is the infamous wall sit. So you'll see people who they sit against the wall and they kick their legs into the floor like so, or if they're trying to do it in a single leg position, they'll do it like that. Now, in theory, good exercise. Obviously, your leg is supporting you. You've got a little bit of support through the wall. What's not to like about that? Well, actually, several things. First thing is you're not learning any form of foot control, which if you're this far into the video now, you'll understand is massively important. Is that for knee health, we need the foot to be strong as the bone, the tibia, moves inwards and also outwards at different phases of hip extension. So that's one rule. The second thing is from a physics point of view, we are creating a heck of a lot of tension through the knee due to the frictional force of the floor. So in other words, as we're doing this, we are kicking into the ground. So this is essentially a leg extension, which again, you could say, well, what's not to like about that? But if you think of where we are, and if we sit down a little bit further into it, so you've got a more of a flexed hip, the amount of force that's going through that knee is very, very high. And if someone's knee injury is a patellar tendinitis or tendinopathy, you've got a heck of a lot of tension that's going through that patella. And if you've never addressed the foot position, so in other words, that foot is still pronated like that, so it's rotated inwards, you could build strength and put force through that knee whilst it's still rotated and irritated. So you're building strength in a faulty position, but you're also irritating a knee which is rotated and it's not going to like it. If you then factor in things like body weight, so if I'm heavier, so a heavier person, there's more forces going through the knee, that's a big factor as well. But the biggest thing about this, which I think is extremely important, is that you're emphasizing concentric knee activity. And what I mean by that is that you're teaching the knee how to shorten. So it's contracting hard whilst it's stabilizing. Now, in a lot of cases with the knee, you'll get extreme amounts of tightness in this teardrop area here, in the inside. And if that gets tight and the knee becomes hyperextended, we lose our cushioning ability. And if you're anybody who has a knee problem, it's more than likely that your eccentric strength, so your ability to cushion the floor, bend the knee and load through the glute, has been reduced. So what you're doing by emphasizing this, so quad extension, is basically going to put more force through the knee and stop your ability to cushion the floor, which is what you definitely need if you've had any knee problems. So if you wanted to modify this, you could do it very, very simply. So again, it's not that it's a bad exercise, it's just given at the wrong times and probably to people whose ability to do it isn't there yet. So rather than going low down and having your feet here, which is very, very stressful for the knees, you can just go a little bit further up, get a knee bend and do a glute bridge against the wall. So my hips aren't against the wall now, so it's going to be further up in my back. That reduces the forces that's going through the knee. And because my hips are here, I'm then going to bring my knee in like so. I'm going to get that floating heel again. So just a slight float through the foot. So, and then what I'm going to do is hinge backwards into it like this. So my hips are going towards the wall. And then I'm going to do a glute bridge up and bring myself away. So I've got just a tiny heel raise there, so my foot is more active. I'm going to be able to control my hips because they're not pinned against the wall. And think of it as you're just doing a glute bridge where you go back, 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 hips touch the wall, control that motion, knee goes in, up, 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 control the glute. Now, despite that looking really easy, what you're doing there is teaching the knee how to stabilize, because you are still pushing yourself up, but in a position where you can teach the hip how to move as well, which is incredibly important. So if you're somebody who's ever done wall sits really deep for long periods of time and you haven't had any success, stand up a little bit further, have your shoulders against the wall and change to this variation. It's a lot friendlier for your knees and it has a really good carryover to everyday activity. Okay, thanks for watching the video. So as always, the thing that I want to emphasize is there are no good or bad exercises, just more or less applicable, and exercises that are picked at the wrong time. Hopefully what you'll find in this video is that I'm explaining why you'd utilize things at certain stages. So if you found it really useful, I'd really appreciate if you could pop a comment below with the exercise that you found the most beneficial for you. If you've liked the video and feel like giving it a thumbs up, that helps me a lot. And with these videos, I'm looking at how to explain more about rehabilitation, sports performance and achieving your best, regardless of what sport you do, and also how to optimize your health. Videos are out every 2 weeks, so if you want to hit subscribe to stay up to date, it massively helps me. Thanks for watching.